Welcome to Discovering the Law. My name is Lucy Rivera and I am the host of this program today. You can view this episode at www.discoveringthelaw.com. Today we have a very special guest, Judge Paul Troy from Massachusetts Superior Court. How are you, Judge Troy? Welcome.
I'm good.
Thank you so much for coming.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you.
Your Honor, please tell the viewers, how does someone become a judge in Massachusetts?
Well, I should say that I retired 3 weeks ago, and I had to retire because I was 70 years old, and that's the mandatory retirement age.
Okay.
But I wanted to be a judge, but I didn't really know how to go about it. I wasn't political. I didn't really know anyone. So, but a friend of mine was applying for the appeals court, and I always wanted to be a Superior Court judge. He said, why don't you give it a try? So I got the application, and the application was a list of questions, and it ended up, mine was about 32 pages long. And it was really everything about your life. It was your full family background, every job you ever had, all the cases you've tried, what types of cases they were, who was involved in the cases, the lawyers on the other side. What are the 5 most important cases that you ever did? What legal education have you taken? What courses have you taught? Everything about your family. It was really exhaustive application, which took me months to fill out. And so then I submitted it to what's called the Judicial Nominating Committee. And I really didn't know what was going to happen. They told me I may get an interview and I may not. And then about 2 weeks later, I got a call saying that an interview had been scheduled for me like the following week. So I went down to the Judicial Nominating Committee and I went to a room. It was a big conference room in a lawyer's office with about 22, 23 lawyers and non-lawyers there. And they grilled me about my application, about my background, why do I want to be a judge? Why should they pick me over somebody else? It was really an interesting interview, but I was glad to get out. And then I didn't know what was going to happen after that, except they said that, you know, I'll hear from them down the road. But then I heard that some Judicial Nominating Committee members were contacting lawyers that I had listed that I tried cases against. They were trying to see if, was I fair, was I ethical, was I a good lawyer, would I make a good judge? And I knew that because lawyers were calling me up and sort of harassing me, saying things like, you know, I got a call from them, here you apply to be a judge, and I told them you'd be terrible and stuff like that. So I knew that they wouldn't have told me that if it were true. So then, I don't know, maybe a month or 2 months later, I got a call asking me to go to see the legal counsel for the governor. So I went up there and I talked to him, and he was very nice. And he asked me questions like, anything in your background that might embarrass the governor? And I should know that if there is anything bad at all, it will come out. All the dirt comes out, and not only the governor, but you embarrass yourself and your family too. So don't go forward with this. And I said, gee, there really isn't that I know of. And so then he said, okay, well, you'll hear from us. 2 weeks later, he called me back and he said, come on up and see me. So I went up to the State House and he said, you're going to meet the governor. She's trying to decide whether to make you a judge or not. And I was in a state of shock. So I'd never been in the governor's office before. I'd never been a governor before. It was Governor Swift. I wasn't political.
Governor Swift?
Yeah, it was Governor Swift, and she was wonderful. So she started grilling me. What do I think of mandatory sentences, and what can I bring to the judgeship that would be special and to the people of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and so forth. So finally, at the end of it, she said, I have decided to nominate you to the Superior Court. So I said, great, thank you so much. It wasn't over, though, because the next thing that happened was the state police were visiting my neighbors, my friends, doing an investigation. I had to sign a waiver of my taxes and of my criminal record so they could get taxes the last 10 years, I think, and get at my criminal record. doing background checks. And my neighbors are calling me, telling me that a state trooper was still here asking questions about your background and whether you were a good neighbor and anything they bad. So finally, I had to appear before the Governor's Council, and they had their own application, which in large measure talked about things like my political contributions and so forth. And their job is to have final approval on judges to make sure that they're really qualified and that they're not there because they're political or they made donations or something. And so that was like a 10-page application for there, and my schools I went to, and some of the same things in the original application. So I had to appear before them, and it went well.
Good.
I was scared to death, but it went well. They grilled me, but they were very nice. I was you know, I had been in the Army, I'd been in Vietnam, came from a big firm, I'd been U.S. Attorney. I had the things that they liked to say.
Great background.
Yeah, I had a good background, and I don't know, it just worked out well, and they told me they're going to vote next week.
Yes.
And the following week in the newspaper, I read that they had confirmed me. So
That's how you found out. That's your notice on the paper.
yeah, yeah. And so I was thrilled.
Yeah,
and then I was sworn in about 2 months later, and I loved every minute of it.
So now you said it was retirement mandatory because of your age, but what are you going to do? You don't strike me like someone who's just going to enjoy their retirement. What are you planning on doing?
Yeah, well, I really wanted to stay involved in the law and the court system, and so I joined a group called JAMS, 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 and it actually stands for Judicial Arbitration and Mediation Services, and it's the largest mediation arbitration service in the country. I was thrilled to join it because there's 13 retired judges there.
Okay.
And so I'm a mediator
All right.
and an arbitrator with them. So it's really been fun.
And mediation and arbitration are what are they, and how are they similar or different?
That's a really good question. In arbitration, the arbitrator hears the case as if she or he were a judge. The witnesses are sworn, people testify, the exhibits are entered into evidence, and the arbitrator decides the case. She or he writes a written decision. They can be 12, 15, 20 pages long, what the case is about, who testified, and the bottom line is who prevails, who wins, and how much money, and so forth. Okay. And so it's really a trial, just like you might have in a courtroom, but it's much quicker. If you have a very specialized area like construction area, a lot of times the parties agree to arbitrate because they'd rather have someone who knows the construction field make the decision than jurors who may not. So the arbitrator is like a judge, and there's a trial, and someone wins, someone loses. A mediator doesn't decide anything. A mediator's job is to try to get the parties to work out an agreement. So typically there's been a lawsuit. You know, if I give an example, your mother-in-law is getting old, or your mother's getting old, you want her to move in with you, but she wants to have her own space, so you agree to build a room onto the side of your house, and then it'll be, she'll have her own space, have her own bathroom and kitchenette and so forth, and still have access to your home. And you hire a contract, and the contractor does the plans and builds the room, and you pay a down payment, but you're unhappy with the room. You think the floors are crooked, the walls aren't quite straight, the plumbing doesn't really work correctly. It's just nothing like you expected, and you say, I'm not going to pay for that. You did a terrible job.
Yes.
Of course, the contractor wants to be paid, insists that the job is great,
Exactly.
and so it ends up in a lawsuit. Well, the problem with a lawsuit, it can be very expensive, and it could last for years before you finally get your day in court.
Yes.
So oftentimes the lawyers will say, let's try to mediate the case. And the mediator will meet with both sides and try to get them to work out an agreement. Typically what we do as the mediators typically meets with both sides in one room in the beginning, of the mediation session and then puts them in separate rooms and goes back and forth. Like, while I talk to the contractor says he'll take out the floors and replace them. And maybe the other side will say, I don't want him in the room again. He wrecked it already. I'm not going to let him try to fix it.
Can be difficult.
It's, well, what about then if he gives a discount? He gives you money and you can hire someone else. So you go back and forth, and typically it takes most of a day to work out an agreement. Now, if they don't work out an agreement, then the case goes back to trial. It's as simple as that.
Okay.
But it's a good way to do it because both sides can decide what they want to do, you know, rather than hoping the jury will find for them and hoping that they'll win. It requires compromise, but they both come to an agreement they can live with.
And in the mediation, the results are what do you call binding, meaning you have to abide by them as the parties go to mediation, or can they be bent?
Well, I'm sorry, excuse me. Yeah.
No,
an arbitration is typically binding where the arbitrator decides, like a judge. This is my ruling, you owe $400,000. That's the ruling, and that's it. The mediation, if they have to agree, typically after mediation, they both sign an agreement, what the deal is, and they abide by it, and they agree to dismiss the court case, and it's over. But there's not binding on them until they sign the agreement.
Until they sign the agreement in mediation. Okay. For our viewers, our guest today is Judge Paul Troy, who used to be in the Superior Court, but we've learned that he's now retired, and he's now doing arbitrations and mediations, and we're learning about that. Judge Troy, now tell us about your role in Superior Court. There's a jury trial in the Superior Court. Do you believe in that system, and what are your feelings about juries in Massachusetts?
Well, I actually think the jury system is wonderful, and I've always loved it. The reason is, if a judge decides the case, or even an arbitrator decides the case, particularly a judge though, where it's particularly in the court system, because the arbitration, they both agree to do it. In the court system, you go before a judge. The stakes are so high. If a judge made the final decision, if the judge rendered the verdict, and the word verdict is derived from two Latin words, dictum and veritas, to speak the truth. If the judge made the decision, there's always a chance that the losing party would feel that they weren't treated fairly, that they didn't receive justice. You know, the judge didn't like women, didn't like men, didn't like minorities, the judge wasn't paying attention, whatever it may be. Because most of us do that. We don't say, I guess I had the bad position. We look for reasons why we lost. The jury system, you have all kinds of people who come in, none of them really want to be there. They come in the morning and they get their jury notice and they have to be there and they're trying to do their duty and they will do their duty. But statistically, they're older and younger and they're richer and poorer and they're blue collar and professionals. And in all these people, the jury's chosen from all these people who see life in their own way. Everybody sees life in their own way.
Yes.
Everybody has their own way of determining credibility and what is the right way to live and what makes sense.
Yes.
And what adds up, what doesn't add up. So with the jury system, all 12 of the jurors sit in court, watch the same witnesses who are under oath, see the same exhibits, which have to be original, has to be a reason why there's not an original, whether it's a gun or whether it's a contract, whatever it is. And they all have to agree upon one verdict. And when a verdict comes in, it's amazing. There's electricity in the air. Everybody's been waiting, and you know the jury's out deliberating. Usually we're on as the judge to the next case. But when the jury you know how they work so hard during the trial, and so often jurors, even though they'd rather not be there, they really get into the case. They take notes, because they all can take notes now, and they get invested in the case. And sometimes my lobby would be near a jury room. I can't hear in, but I hear yelling and talking, and they're really fighting for what they think is the right verdict. And when they finally have, and if they don't reach a verdict, it's a mistrial. It has to be retried again. And so when they finally reach a verdict and they come down and they announce the verdict in open court, they speak the truth, even though you don't like the verdict sometimes, there's never a feeling it wasn't fair. You never had a feeling that the whole jury didn't like me or the whole jury wasn't paying attention. You always feel it's fair. And that's, there's peace in that. You know, from a lawyer's perspective, and I tried a lot of cases and I lost some cases, even when I lost them, there's an expression, the jury spoke.
Okay.
And so it's wonderful.
Yes. And in your experience, you've tried civil and criminal cases.
Yes.
And tell us about that. Tell us about the difference, and tell us about the jury system, if there is a difference in your opinion on those two different cases, and what are they?
Well, in the Superior Court, where I sat, that's where the major criminal and civil trials are tried. We were on a circuit. Every 3 months we moved. So I might be a Suffolk Superior for 3 months in one session, then moved to Norfolk for 3 months, and then moved to Brockton, to Plymouth, to Bristol County, to Barnstable, down the Cape. And sometimes it was civil, and sometimes they were criminal cases. In the criminal case, of course, the charges have been brought against the defendant. And the case is always the Commonwealth versus the person. So it'd be Commonwealth versus Smith, or Commonwealth versus Jones, because every criminal offense is considered to be a crime against all the people.
Yes. And
so even the victim is only a witness in a criminal case. The district attorney prosecutes the case. The defendant has a defense attorney, and if the defendant is convicted, he's going to get probation or go to jail or go to state prison. In a civil case, each side has his or her own lawyer or the company's own lawyer, and it's usually about money. You hit me with your car. You breached the contract. You were supposed to paint my house and you didn't do a good job. Whatever, usually you're suing for money of some kind. Not always money. Sometimes it's, I was fired from my job, I want my job back.
Yes.
Sometimes they're going to cut trees down. I want you to stop them cutting trees. They're going to foreclose on my house. I don't want you to stop them from foreclosing on my house. So they're really entirely different things, but it's always a jury. We're so fortunate to have the jury, which we do in Massachusetts and the United States. Some countries don't. Some countries, in England, I think to this day, in a civil case, you only get a jury for libel and slander. Many countries, the judge decides everything. There's no such thing as a jury trial. Best 3 judges decide. And so we're so fortunate here to have our system.
But would you feel that in a civil case, for instance, a jury trial makes more sense rather than a judge, as much as you would do in arbitration, where you would decide based on the evidence? What are your feelings on that?
Well, I'm just a big believer in the jury system. I always had great confidence in the jury. You know, all the judges go up in the Superior Court to speak to juries after they return their verdict, not about their deliberations, but how we are treated and you know, anything we can do to make you make future jurors more comfortable, or any questions you have and so forth. And the things they tell me just make me feel so good about how hard they worked and how they fought with each other and how finally this one convinced so-and-so. So a jury trial takes longer, it's more expensive, you may wait years for it, but there's a lot to be said for it.
And how many jurors are there, Judge Troy? How many would there be in civil and criminal? In
the Superior Court, there's 12 jurors, both civil and criminal. In the District Court, which would be more like the community courts with a lesser of criminal offenses and lesser civil, state court, there's 6 juries of 6. In the federal court, in civil, there's juries of 6 too. But in Superior Court, there's always a jury of 12. We have a couple of alternates, but typically 12 would deliberate.
In the federal courts, there's a jurors of how many?
In criminal cases, 12. In a
Yes.
civil cases, 6.
6.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, following up on the jury system,
Yes.
and what is the most challenging court to sit in, the civil or the criminal? Would you share maybe one of your some of the cases or your experiences in both courts?
Criminal cases, I struggled a lot with criminal cases because of the sentencing. I found the sentencing very difficult. In the civil side, there were a lot more writing, a lot more motions and so forth. But in the criminal side, I think the trials were just as easy to try, but in the end, if the defendant were convicted, you had to determine the sentence. And I'd lie awake at night, sometimes upset at myself of maybe I was too harsh, or maybe because of what a victim went through, I didn't give a long enough sentence. And so I enjoyed them both, but that was the big problem with criminal. I did a lot of murder cases, and the stakes are so high with them, it's frightening. You know, if they get convicted of first-degree murder, there's no parole. I mean, they can be 90 years old and have Alzheimer's and have mental issues, and they are never getting out, you know, and the stakes are so high. Civil, it's just money.
All right.
You know, it's ordinarily.
And what helped you decide on the sentence? How did you decide on the sentence?
Well, there were three things you consider. One of them is every law tells the maximum sentence. So, for example, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon is a 10-year maximum sentence. And so, but a lot of times there's a plea agreement. The district attorney and the defense counsel agree, you know, we'll jointly recommend 3 to 5 years. And so almost every judge would do that. That's fine. If they both are happy with that, that's fine too. Otherwise, if there's no agreement, we have the guidelines, and the guidelines give range of sentences for virtually every offense, depending upon the defendant's prior criminal record. And so you literally look up the offense. Is it assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, assault on an elderly person, is it assault on a fireman, assault on a police officer, what it is. And you look up, and it's almost like a tax return. You look up the level of offense severity, you look up the criminal record, and it would give you a guideline. The guideline might be, it's always in months, it might be 26 to 32 months. And then you decide somewhere in there. Now, they weren't binding, but I found them very helpful.
Yes.
Because they were put together by groups of district attorneys and defense lawyers and psychiatrists and judges, and so it gives you some comfort that you're in the area that most judges are.
Yes, and in Superior Court, they're not binding, but federal court, the guides, they're binding.
Well, the guidelines were, but not anymore. There's been a new decision that made them less binding. They used to be the judge had no choice.
Yeah.
But now they're more guidelines like in the state court.
Well, this has been a highly interesting conversation, Judge Troy. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and they're asking me to wrap up.
Okay.
But I just wanted to thank you so much for coming. And to all our viewers, thank you for tuning in. www.discovering the law will be out with the interview with Justice Paul Troy, Superior Court Judge, and now doing mediations and arbitrations. Thank you for watching. My name is Lucy Rivera, and I hope to see you next month.